I'm Brandon Miller, and you are listening to Coach. This weekly series dives deep into the world of Clifton strengths and how they impact your daily life. Hear from certified strengths coaches on the ins and outs, quirks, and characteristics of all 34 strengths and 4 domains and how they play out in real life. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Strengths Whisperer Season 2. Coach to Coach. This is your host, Brandon Miller with 34 Strong. I have with me today Chad Ahern, and he comes to us from talentandteams.com. He's looking to work with mission-driven leaders, nonprofit organizations, also a podcast host, along with his co-host, Jen Warner, the Thoughtful Talent Show. Chad, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Brandon. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm excited to talk deliberative with you today. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the measure twice, cut once strength of deliberative. Chad and I were laughing before the show. This is your host's alter ego. So this is one of those strengths that I look for to partner with because it is very much an alternative to how my natural talents think, feel, and behave. And so we're going to rely on our deliberative guide today. Chad's going to take us down the path of learning and understanding all things deliberative. But Chad, let's start with this. Tell us about what you're doing at Talent and Teams, maybe a little about the show. Let's give the listeners a little bit of a taste of who you are and where you're coming from.
No, I appreciate it. So first of all, I'll just say that I'm a fellow Gallup-certified strengths coach like yourself, based out of the Burlington, Vermont area. So I love working with primarily New England-based companies that have a mission focus. Really love making community impact. And more recently, I've been focusing on coaching a lot of frontline leaders. So not necessarily the individual contributors, but that first tier of leaders that might be in their first or second leadership role and helping them understand their strengths and how they can come to leadership. And as you mentioned, I've also got another podcast, Strengths-Based, that I do with a fellow Gallup-certified strengths coach, Jen Warner, called the Thoughtful Talent Show. And we just finished our season 1 where we did a lot of delving into strengths. So it's going to be a nice partner to your show. And Jen and I are getting ready for our season 2 launch a little later in July, where we're going to start focusing on some issues and topics around leadership, followership, employee engagement, all things workplace, and we'll tie in strengths as it's appropriate. So yeah, it's great to be here. And thanks for the intro and for the invite to join the conversation.
You got it, Chad. So you could have chosen many coaching methods as a focus for your practice. Let's answer the big question. Why strengths? Why did you choose strengths as your primary?
Yeah, so I'd taken the Myers-Briggs, I'd done DISC, and really what I loved when I get introduced to Clifton Strengths is just the specificity of it. I have analytical as my number 5, so I also loved a lot of the data that Gallup was able to put out around it, but also just the uniqueness of it and focusing on what people do well instead of being critiqued. I've been sent to those classes. Oh, you're not a strong writer, so let's send you off to a writing class. And then having this language, understanding, oh, this is why I'm always interested in a lot of different things, because I have learners number 1, and I'm cautious, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. That comes from deliberative. So just the thought process around it was something that I really enjoy, and I love bringing to other people because it gives so much great language around coaching.
Yeah, I have a similar experience, being in a role when strengths came that challenged each person in the organization to take a look at what we were doing, how we arrived there, and were we in the ideal fit? And it was fascinating to have the conversations with people where new insights and new vocabulary really about themselves helped to form the basis of what future roles could look like for work. If work is a place where we're going to spend a third of our lives, and I remember you saying you spent some time in higher ed, so maybe with students, we know this to be true, right? We're helping students shape their career, and something I've told students as well. You got to make some really important choices in life. 3 of them in particular. 1, choose carefully who you partner with, who's your mate, because there's a lot of time going into that one. 2, think very carefully about your career. You're spending at least a third of your life there. And 3, buy a really good mattress, because you're going to find as you get older, sleep is really, really important. And you're going to spend a lot of your time there too. So When we think about life decisions and how we weigh them and make them, let's dive into deliberative. So, Chad, you are the guide today. Tell us about deliberative. You found it in your profile. You had this word presented to you. Give us some insight.
Yeah. So there are a couple things that I think are really important to notice or take note of when we talk about deliberative. One, when it was presented to me as a word, I had sort of a gut reaction of, that's a little maybe strong. Yes, I'm cautious, but is it really this significant? And the more I really delved into it, it definitely fits. I'm cautious by nature. I'm a firstborn, if that has anything to do with it. So I was always doing sort of the responsible thing. I have responsibility as my number 3 talent and analytical is my number 5. And those 3 are always working together, always kind of weighing what the data tells me, what my responsibilities are, what can I promise people. And so it does have that very cautionary vibe to it, which is very much me, now that I've really taken the time to process it. I think one of the things that has been really interesting for me to delve into in the last, I'd say 2 years, is it is one of the themes and one of the sort of talent groupings that really sometimes holds me back a little bit. But when I get with other coaches or I'm in a team environment, it's one of those themes that people are like, oh man, we're so thankful you're in the room. You're always thinking about like the next thing or the next speed bump that we need to address. So it can be really helpful for me to share it with others, but sometimes it actually holds me back a little bit. And we can probably get into that a little bit later. But yeah, it's one that I've come to accept and I'm constantly trying to fine tune. It's one of the themes I also find is most difficult to balance on its knife edge. It's very easy to go from a very positive contribution to having it trip me up on a personal level.
I appreciate you mentioning that. I have a team member who is a tremendous strength to me personally. His name is Zane. Shout out to you, Mr. Grace. And he is our resident deliberative. In fact, I think one of 2 on the whole team. And, Zane has often at times felt like the lone voice of reason, like the voice challenging the collective energy was moving in one direction. And Zane was the voice over here saying, but what about this? Or have we thought about that? And what I've come to love and respect about him is that his risk assessment is a very thorough process. And what it means is often Zane's decisions are safe because they're very vetted. They're not foolproof, but they're safe. They're safe, they're secure. And when your strengths run different to that, so my strengths are a little more on the side of I'm comfortable learning as I go. I'm comfortable with a high risk threshold. It's part of my journey in business, life, you name it. But something Zane does is that, once he's reached the decision-making point, he's very definitive. And then he's locked in. It's hard to shake him at that point because the thorough analysis has been done. The vetting has been done. Let's go. And it reminded me, I played football in school, American football for my friends overseas. And I played a position called linebacker. And in this position, my coach had this saying over and over. He would say, don't go until you know. But when you know, go, go, go. And the idea being, make your analysis of what you're seeing. And in this case, obviously, it's happening real time. And then when you have the definitive decision, then go. And I've always marveled that deliberative can do this. So it's very strong in its capacity to choose course. And I believe that's why it landed in the executing domain, because the process leads to action. Some of the thinking themes, thinking can lead to more thinking. This one is, I ran the analysis, boom, here we go. Like, let's go. Game in. And so wonder if you could shed some light there for us.
Yeah, no. So first of all, I'll bring up a similar athletic analogy. So I played left defensive back in soccer in high school. And my coaches were always kind of on me about like, Chad, when you play defense, you can't just keep backing up and giving that guy more space and more dribble room. And what it was I was thinking through, okay, when can I be sure to go get the ball? Because if I'm going to slide time, if I'm going to commit to it, then I'd better end up with the ball. I don't want to end up slide tackling and then just have, the opponent dribble the ball over around me. I'd feel like a fool. And so I always was very cautious. I would hold that player to the far outside so that the rest of my team could get back. So then I had that sort of assurance that there was backup. But if I got burned the first time and nobody was back there, again, my deliberative responsibility combo came to play. Shoot, I'd blown it. So that being sure until you go is very much a deliberative trait that I would resonate with. I think, just thinking about some of the other contributions that this group of talents has, this theme has, I've come to sort of 4 sort of analogies that I think are really helpful for people to understand. This is your landmine detector. You just talked about, is it Zane?
Zane, yeah.
Thinking about things before you progress forward. It's not that we're opposed to progress. We're just going to be really thoughtful about it. And so it's not only the landmine detector, but it's also your disposal unit, because it's not risk aversion. It's not going around the landmine. It's, okay, what's the landmine? And then how do we figure out, whether it's as a team or as an individual, how am I going to address this? So I think that's one sort of value. That's sort of the near term. That's like the really close version. And this goes to your point about this being in the executing theme. So the other side of that is it can also act as almost like a fireman watchtower. A lot of the big national parks, especially out west where you are, the big mountains, they've got these big fire towers where they put, the forest wardens or the forest rangers up at the towers, looking for lightning strikes and fires coming over the tops of the mountains. I think that's another way that this theme I've often looked at is I'm looking at what's the decision 3 miles from here that we're going to have to make, and the impact of our current decisions are going to have on that, and thinking about the long-term risk of making certain decisions. So I think, as you said, they can be really helpful in terms of team conversation because they can bring up the opposing view or hey, what's coming on the horizon? And the third one is sort of a 10th man. I don't know if you've ever caught the movie World War Z with Brad Pitt.
Sometime in the past, yeah, I did. I recall.
Yeah. So there's a principle that was established within, it really was popularized around the Israeli war, this 1967 Israeli war, the 10th man. Thinking about if you've got 10 people and 9 of them are thinking the same way, is the responsibility of the 10th man to think the opposite. What is the opposite? And what could go wrong if we go down the groupthink path? So that kind of goes to your point about Zane being the one that throws in sort of that, oh, what about this? Or have we considered this? And I think that's a real value to this theme. The last analogy I'll just throw out is, and I just came across this one recently, is most people have caught the movie Top Gun. And in one of the scenes, Tom Cruise is being chased by one of his instructor pilots. And he finally says, I'm going to hit the brakes. It'll fly on by, right? It's a very famous scene. That's what deliberative does. It's not stopping the plane. It is hitting the brakes long enough for the risk, instead of chasing you, to get out in front of you so that you can then do something with them. Okay, you can attack it. You can you can fly away from them. But it's that action of hitting the brakes, letting the fears and the worries and the doubts and the risks all get out in front of you so that you can actually see them instead of being chased by them.
That's great. Talentinteams.com, friends. Chad Ahern, looking for businesses in the New England area. Loves to work with those who have a mission-driven organization. I'm sure does some coaching along the way. Do strengths coaching. Can hear that coming through. Chad, if we're coaching someone with high deliberative, let's do a little piece for all the coaches out there. So we're coaching someone with high deliberative, and we're helping them to relate to this, to understand the reality that this is a pattern of behavior that can be productively applied. And so when you were describing earlier the cautious, good risk manager, vigilant, thoughtful, conscientious, the good air brakes, I like that. The air brakes. It's not the full stop, but it's stopping long enough so the problem gets in front of you, not chasing from behind you. What an excellent way to think about deliberative. So, Chad, when you're coaching or you know of people being coached or you yourself being coached as a high deliberative, what are some tips, some tools to support someone with high deliberative in a coaching capacity?
Yeah. So I think one of the first big questions that I would encourage, particularly another coach to ask somebody that they're coaching that has deliberative is really get them to parse out what are they really concerned about. This is where sort of that, 5 or 7 layers of why kind of thought process can be really helpful because you really need to get at the core of what their concern is. They might start to talk about certain risks, but those probably have an underlying core source. And so I think it's really helpful for a coach to help somebody with deliberative really understand what that core issue is. I think another really good question is, what's the true threat level here? It's one thing to be chased in an F-14 by another opposing fighter pilot and being shot down, but I think deliberative can get wrapped up in a risk aversion mindset, especially if they're really raw or are still just getting used to the idea of what deliberative means for them. It can feel a lot like they just want to avoid the risk versus dissecting what the actual threat level is. So I think it's just really good to know, are you setting up something that's going to blow up the entire company? Are you blowing up something, potentially about to stand on something that's going to just harm you? Or is it just all in your mind? Like, is it just a small sort of, fun little trap that you've worked yourself into that really isn't going to have any damage at all? So I think understanding what that threat level is will help the coachee figure out where they need to go next.
What about process, Chad? So the ability for a deliberative to do what you just said. So assess the threat level to determine, are we talking a level 2 or a level 8 here out of 10? Like what level of threat? Because then there comes the point of, well, how much emphasis here? How strong do you need to stand on this one? Because if you are that 10th person and you're the one pushing back and you're the one responsible to try to make sure our groupthink isn't leading us all off a cliff, so to speak, right? What do you do when you're coaching someone to help them determine, that level?
That's a really good question. And I think that's really going to come down to the person because it's going to, at least for me, it comes down to a lot of my other themes. So if I have, like I mentioned earlier, I have analytical as my number 5. If the data is showing me or telling me that we're about to make the wrong decision, then I'm going to stand darn hard. And if somebody removes me, it's probably not the best behavior, but I'm going to be the one that comes back and said, look, I told you so, when it blows up in their face. Probably not the best team behavior, but it is something that if I feel strongly enough about.
But it's real. That's real.
It's real. It's very
because
much real.
I have experienced that when someone is putting the warning strong, this, and this isn't to call out my team member from earlier, but this is to say that way of indicating, listen to me. I can help save us a lot of waste, loss, heartache, and what energy, I'm bringing. Yeah, what I'm bringing is something we all need, and it's not always going to be, the alter ego positivity, right? Or the activators, or the self-assurance. Like, we got this. Like, it's not always going to feel like them, right? The herd movers, so to speak, the ones that are going to get out in front. This strength, though, is so incredible to that balance, right? That ability. And I have found, and I wonder if you have too, that there are times with the deliberative where you want to empower, you want to give a voice, you want to give platform for that strength to do its best work while developing it. Because it has to, as you said, it has to learn to assess the risk accurately so that it's not out crying wolf on something they're calling an 8 that's really a 2, right? Or it's a 5, there's consequence, there's give here. There's give.
And I think that goes back to, when you think about not only coaching somebody, but also thinking about the contribution that this theme makes to teams, is sometimes our threat meters go off earlier, but it may not be as severe as we think it is. So sometimes allowing discussion around what that risk is, I think is really important. So sometimes maybe a team leader who has somebody with deliberative on their team, you need to give some time to talk that through. And what are the risks that you're bringing to the table? I've had, one of my early in my career leaders was really good about that. I would bring up something, we were going to hold an event. I would bring up this, this concern, this concern, this concern, and talking it out over 3-5 minutes, easily resolved. I've had other leaders completely ignore some of my risk assessment, and we've bitten the bullet for it. And so it's really about providing for that space for the discussion of what are the risks and how real are they.
That's good. That's good. Chad, I want to jump over to the needs of this strength, because one of the number one needs that I have personally made myself very aware of is respect of privacy for this strength. That a deliberative needs to have the space and the respect to share as much or as little about who they are privately. And I have found over the years, as I've coached leaders and managers who have felt at times that this person is maybe a bit cagey and held back and reserved, and to say, no, they're just deliberative. They think carefully about who they share what with. And you mentioned other strengths. If they're high relator, especially so, they're gonna have a very careful and curated circle of trusted people in their life. And work might not be that circle. Work might be, I'm here for work. You get this work part of me. And as you might coach, I imagine leaders of teams with your work, coaching, organizational executive leaders, have you found any need there to maybe advocate a bit for the privacy deliberatives might require as a need?
Yeah, I mean, so first I'll address this on sort of personal level, that yes, that is very much a trait of this talent theme. Depending upon how well I've established relationships, I don't have relator particularly high in my order, but my deliberative probably comes across as that relator, very sort of who's my inner circle, who do I trust, who do I not trust. And I think this again comes back to, if I'm coaching a leader, I actually haven't had too many leaders themselves have deliberative, but I've had a few team members of team leaders that have had it, and just making them aware that these people are going to be relatively reserved and only share what they really feel needs to be on the table. I think it behooves leaders to take a little extra time and care to get to know their deliberatives and establish that sort of circle of trust and a level of trust that the deliberative person is going to need before they speak up. I mentioned my very early on leader. She did a great job establishing that psychological safety. Therefore, my deliberative can show up pretty, not uninhibited, but much more open. My very next leader was pretty closed and didn't really take the time to establish a real strong relationship with me. I kept my personal life pretty much to my person, and my work was my work. And so it is something leaders need to probably invest a little bit more time around, of developing that psychological safety so that people like myself with deliberative know when and where they can share important details of their life.
That's great, Chad. Thank you. Listeners, Chad Ahern, you're hearing so much rich depth and meaning and understanding to deliberative. Chad, I have found with leaders of teams who have members with deliberative, especially if they value some fun, frivolity, games, like they like to bond through that. And they might find that their high deliberative teams may not naturally engage as easy with those things. I'm here for work. I'm here to do what I'm here to do. I love that you're laughing at this. And I've encouraged them, give them permission to observe, give them permission to understand the reason why, understand what we're doing, what our goal here is, and offer them opportunity to share alternatives for ways to bond and team build and do some of that. And you said it very well, often comes back to the leader. And the other piece I've offered is, this is a strength that does well when you don't put them on the spot. They don't do as well when you do that. They don't prefer that. There's two, intellection and deliberative are the two strengths that I caution leaders, don't put them on the spot. Give them advance. If you're going to do spontaneous activities, this is the strength. Give them an advance. Let them know what's coming. You will get a much better version of that if you give them some advance.
The reason I was laughing, and for the video side of this, you'll see my head shaking up and down. This comes back to that very one of the very first words you used around deliberative, and it comes right from the description: reserved. Reserved in big, bold, fat letters of we're not the ones that are going to, we're kind of the opposite of woo. We're the ones that are going to want to think about who we interact with, what we want to do, what activities. We're not going to be the ones that typically are doing the funny workplace photos with all sorts of, joy and excitement, unless we get some prep or some time to put ourselves in that right mindset to engage with that. So yeah, I would definitely agree with, give us a little bit of a heads up. Let us know what this is going to look like, because I think there's also sort of a personal reputation piece to this of, I don't want to come off looking like like I don't know what I'm doing, or that I half-baked this. And so knowing what the end product is going to be out there, that comes back on our sort of reputation, that has some bearing. And so that's why I was laughing and giggling along with your comments, because it's that reserved word front and center.
Yeah, powerful. Chad, thank you so much for bringing just such depth, insight, a richness to this strength. In my years of working with strengths, deliberative is one that can be misunderstood. It is more rare. So when it does show up, depending upon the leader, the circumstance, the situation, this one might take a little extra understanding. Every strength is unique. They all have their peculiarities. We're talking, Chad, about next season starting to do the fun part of how they show up with their partners, and there's the variance. It's like the face of a diamond, right? You get the variance of that theme depending upon how the light hits it and which other diamonds are around it. And then they combine to form different versions. So this season, it's pretty raw to one. And I think you and I have done an admirable job of keeping it there. But I do appreciate the richness of you pulling in some cousins. Because when you add responsibility, when you add analytical, which are very common with this strength, by the way, very common, those two in particular, you're going to get a pretty good definition there. So listeners today, thank you again for joining us. Chad Ahern, talentandteams.com, the Thoughtful Talent Show. Chad, where can they find your podcast?
Yeah, so we're on the Apple Podcast. We actually distribute right off of acast.com. So it's shows.acast.com/The Thoughtful Talent Show. They should be able to find us there. I do most of my sort of social media work on LinkedIn. So that's just the very end is /C Ahern. I was early in personalizing, so I got the first initial, last name, all one word.
Listeners, if you are curious to learn more about your strengths or the strengths of others, do reach out after the show. If you listened, Brandon at 34strong.com, our sponsor, 34 Strong, for this season. We have a resource for you, How to Be a Good Teammate to Me, where we share with you the contributions and needs of all of the strengths, and one of our favorite exercises for teams, The Best of Me. And if you would like that resource, again, Brandon at 34strong.com, and we'll make sure you get a copy. With that, dear listeners, we've reached the conclusion of today's episode. Thank you for joining us as we spoke with Chad Ahern on Deliberative. Look for our next podcast coming out soon, and we'll see you next time on The Strengths Whisperer, Coach to Coach.
Thank you for tuning in to The Strengths Whisperer, Coach to Coach. Please feel free to reach out to Brandon to partner with 34 Strong for collaboration opportunities to serve your employees or clients together. If you are a strengths coach, lead a strengths-based team, or are a fan of strength, we invite you to receive our complimentary resource, How to Be a Good Teammate to Me, Understanding My Contributions and Needs. Email Brandon_Miller at 34strong.com to connect, and he will gladly share this resource that will continue to unlock the power of strength.